My name's Eli Delaney, and I have the honor of meeting some pretty cool people. These are the entrepreneurs, the artists, the creatives, the game changers that are making a positive impact in the people that they meet. And I'm a firm believer that the people that you meet can get you anywhere you want to go. And this show is my way of sharing them with you. It's my way of also helping you meet cool people. All right, welcome back to Meet Cool People. Eli here, and today's guest, we have Justin Peters. His podcasting journey started in December 2019. Created The Struggle is Real, a podcast for 20-somethings to look to master good money habits, which I think even at way older ages, we all need to know as well. And that has actually migrated him to the stuff that he is doing today, which is a lot of fun. He is a podcast manager and a host. He launched Simple Pod Studios with his brother, Kyle. And they're basically supporting small business owners with launching, editing, and managing their podcasts. And he and I got introduced recently. We had an awesome conversation and just took off. And I'm like, all right, this dude needs to definitely come on the show. So with that said, Justin, welcome to the show.
Eli, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited for the conversation today.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And the cool thing is I always like to share if there's a possibility of like, where did we get introduced? We got introduced by Andrew Biernat, who was a guest on my show just a few weeks back. So let's see, I'm going to pull it up here. We were on episode 36. So definitely take a look at that for anybody listening. He and I had an awesome conversation. I was a guest on his show. Then he was a guest on my show. And he's like, you know who you need to do? You need to meet Justin. You guys need to talk. And that's kind of where it started. We had a great conversation, hit it off. And you're not too far from me. So I'm in Dallas and you're down in Austin. Correct. So tell us a little bit about you're in that podcast world, which is blown up insanely crazy right now. Tell us a little bit more about the story of what kind of got you in that journey here.
Before I jump into the story too, I love podcasting just for the fact of what happened between us. Like Andrew and I met through podcasting years ago. You guys kind of met through podcasting, or at least built a relationship through podcasting. Yep. And then he introduced us, and we're doing like podcasters would and recording a conversation together. So some of the real beauty of podcasting is really just relationship building on steroids.
I 100% agree. I have met some of the best people, and I have become very, very good friends with people that either I've been a guest on their show or now that I've launched my show have been, come in here. And the cool thing is, like with my show, I'm picky. It's like I'm not inviting people on the show just to have a guest. I'm going through and okay, I meet somebody somehow. And most of the time it ends up being either in person or sometimes like at a virtual event or something. And then we just have a great conversation. It's like, you know what? Yeah, I want to have a better conversation. Let's record that one. And that's where I invite them. And that's like with you. I mean, it was like, well, you and I had an awesome conversation, and it wasn't until the end of the conversation after we were done when I was like, you know what? I would love to have you come as a guest on the show. That's how it works. That's the power of it. But it's cool because you get some of the best relationships that way.
So my journey started, as you mentioned, December 2019. I had just started a sabbatical. I was very lost in my career at the time. I'd been working for an insurance broker for 7 years, made a quick jump to a similar brokerage, and I lasted 5 months total, but I knew at the 3-month mark, maybe even the 3-week mark, that this wasn't the right fit for me. Culture fit, job fit, it just wasn't quite there, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I got some really timely advice from a mentor, and he suggested that I take a sabbatical. And with that sabbatical, he said, spend the first half of your sabbatical not focused on what's next whenever it comes to your career, but investing in a project or a hobby or an interest that you've always wanted to try, but you just never had time because of work. And as soon as he told me that, I knew what it was, and that was podcasting. I'd bought mics 8 months prior to that moment. They sat on a shelf and collected dust. I promised myself I'd start a podcast. I always really loved this medium and modality to learn. And one day I thought, you know what, I could also create in this space. And it took me 8 whole months of pretty much doing nothing and actually taking that time off to jumpstart my podcasting journey. I called my best friend on my way out from my last day on working at my employer. And I said, hey, do you want to be the first guest on my podcast? We booked a day, 6 days from then to record. And I swear I did more in those 6 days leading up to that first interview than I did in the whole 8 months prior. And I got going. I thought this was just going to be a sabbatical project, something to do because I'm too type A to do nothing during a sabbatical. But whenever I re-entered the workforce, I actually doubled down on podcasting. I was having so much fun doing it that I continued producing The Struggle is Real and having great conversations. And it wasn't until 2 years after that, when my brother joined the team, after telling me my audio sucks and that he would love to help me, that we started thinking about offering this opportunity or the service to other podcasters. And it was really cool. He actually started this out. He was in a weird position in his career too. He thought he was going to go full-time freelance and do some podcast editing. He asked, Justin, I need some help getting some first clients. You've been podcasting for 2 years. And at that point in time, I had met tons of other podcasters, especially out of the 2020, 2021 boom of podcasting. So I started calling some people, and I just had so much fun helping my brother grow his freelance business that I eventually asked, could we just build this together? And then here we are 2 years later, running our own podcast agency together.
That is awesome. And it's kind of cool because I know you were telling me that he's got an audio background, which is always kind of fun, which is definitely helpful. And, one of the things for everybody listening, you haven't heard this, you need to hear this with your podcast. Your audio is way more important than the video, just so you know. It's kind of fun when we get into those projects where you're like, okay, this would be kind of fun to do. And next thing you know, you realize you love it so much that you want to turn it into a business. I mean, that's really how entrepreneurs are born, to be perfectly honest. Most of the time it's like, all right, I'm doing this thing. It might be a hobby. It's something I'm playing with. And next thing you know, it's like, I could do this all day. And what is that? It's like, if you could do anything all day, and, what would you do if you could say, I could do this, and that happens to be your job? Yeah, that's called a win. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, I had no intention on really creating a career or even a business out of podcasting. I didn't even give it a whole lot of thought until, once again, my brother kind of put that thought into my head, and I was like, oh yeah, I could probably create a business out of this, and we could probably offer this service. And I know, and it was funny because I'd been having conversations with tons of other entrepreneurs that, once again, out of that 2020, 2021 boom of podcasting, because everybody was locked up at home and they were trying to find additional ways to market their business, podcasting became very popular. And I was getting hit up all of the time. Just, Justin, I know you started a podcast. I'm thinking about starting it. Can you help me? Can I pick your brain for 30 minutes? So I had this Rolodex of people that I'd had conversations with and help guide through their own launch journey. I had no idea I was practicing and building what would eventually be Simple Pod Studios.
Yeah. Well, and it's fun to see how that kind of stuff has blown up, because I think you and I talked about this. Is like, I was an old school podcaster. Like, I came in, my podcast was probably in the first 50,000, which at this point is like nothing. Right. Yep. And that was, I don't even remember what year I put that out. I mean, it's been way over a decade ago, and I just had so much fun with it. And that's how it took off. And then when I was ready to do the Meet Cool People show, I had a bunch of stuff going on, and I decided that, I'm thinking about doing it. And then I was like, yeah, no, I think I'm not ready myself. And now I launched this back in, November, it was my birthday, November 22nd of this last year. So 2023. And it's been a blast. It's just so much fun. And you brought up a really, really good thing about the fact that the industry has exploded so much, and everybody and their dog has a podcast now. What are some of the things, if somebody's thinking about having a podcast, because of course everybody's out there saying you should have a podcast, what are the things that people have to think about before they start, and to decide if it's actually the right medium to get into? Because I think a lot of people are jumping in and they don't realize that it's not really a good fit for them.
I think it's a good question, and also a loaded question, in all honesty. I will never deter someone from at least trying podcasting. I think our industry and many of the professionals that support this industry put too much of a negative connotation on even giving it a go. There's so much pod fading out there, which is essentially just you started a podcast and then stopped producing episodes. And there's a ton of statistics out there, but one that's always rang true for me is 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 7. So I do like giving it some forethought, especially if you're going to heavily invest in creating a podcast up front. But I think if we're specifically talking about it from a business standpoint versus maybe just somebody that's going to be a hobbyist or even a content creator, I think you have to think through, where does your podcast fit in your sales cycle? And what I would encourage you to explore is the fact that I think podcasting is so great at nurturing an audience. I think it can be a mediocre audience builder or audience attractor. And I think this is where a lot of people do pod fade, because they just assume I can create some episodes, I can drop that on Apple and Spotify, and people will start finding me, hearing me, and buying my products. And I think it's a little bit more complex and complicated than that. I do think it's a great place to direct people to, but you have to market your show and you have to get people to your actual podcast. And then people consume hours and hours of you without you having to physically be there or talking to them on a one-on-one standpoint. So that's where I think a lot of the beauty of podcasting comes. But think through where it's got to fit in your own marketing strategy, and ask yourself, if I see no results or ROI from this for 1 year, is it still something that I want to do? And so many of my clients also tell me it's one of their favorite things to do every single week is to have the conversation or create the content for their podcast. And just the ROI from networking and building their communication skills and their own personal brand is worth it to them, then okay, I think we're on the right marks then.
And that was very brilliantly said. And yes, the question was loaded, but you won the test, because reality is you said exactly what I was hoping you would actually say, which is you've got to think through, what's the goal with it, and know that it's not just let's put a podcast out expecting for it to bring in clients directly. It's, I look at everything that we do, from posts on social media to the emails you send out to speaking on stage. All that stuff is just the attraction and leading them in to have the conversation. Yep. And get people to realize you are the right person. And they're like, okay, I like this person. I like him or I like her. And I want to do business with them because I think they can help me. But it's not the starting point. And I love the way you said that. You got that out there, because you're right. So many people, I have people who I've recorded as a guest for their show, and I enjoy being one of the first guests on people's show, because I can kind of help them become a better host. And for me, that's satisfying to help them launch something. But I can't count the number of times where that episode, like the whole entire podcast, never actually went live because they realized it was more work than they wanted to do, and they thought it was going to be easier. Mm-hmm. And I think you've got a really good thing about the fact of, if you see no ROI on it for the next year, are you going to be okay with that? And that's a really good question. I think a lot of people need to ask themselves before they start putting the journey in, because that is an important factor. And, for me, if I get clients out of it, awesome. And I have gotten clients out of it, but the goal for me is to have cool conversations. I just, that's the thing. It is a networking tool. And for me, it's not even a networking as in come on the show and let me get to know you. It's like, no, I've already gotten to know you. I want to give some value to you and share you with the rest of the world, because I think you're cool.
Yes.
And so it's I love how you put that. You just have to really think about what your goal with it is. So when somebody's just thinking about launching their show, what are some of the things that they do need to be prepared for, as far as like, what equipment, and I don't even care about specifics, but what are kind of the levels of what should they be investing in to make sure that it's good enough? We don't have to have the best of the best, the most expensive fancy toys, but I know from my standpoint, like I've been on shows where the host was just using their computer audio or their earbuds or something, and it just didn't sound right. We have a lot of those things. What are a couple of the key points they need to be aware of before they kind of venture in?
I'm a big fan of starting simple, and it's usually why I don't encourage many of my clients to jump straight into video with their podcast. I almost like to at least master audio, or limit to audio, because I do think it requires less capital up front. There's less you need to think about. I don't have to buy lighting. I don't have to buy a camera or a webcam. I don't have to think about putting my makeup on or looking nice every time that an idea comes to mind and I want to record an episode. It really simplifies a lot. And I do think simplification early on in the podcast production process is a very good idea, especially if you're a busy business owner that is a full-time business owner and a part-time podcaster and wants to keep it that way. You don't want to become a full-time podcaster and then only have part-time availability for being an entrepreneur. But if I just field guide wise, equipment, I think having a professional microphone is table stakes now. I do think people expect good quality audio. I think there's just too much competition out in the world of podcasting now for you not to have good sounding audio. I have talked to many people. I've seen the polls on a lot of groups. If they hear a bad sounding episode, they'll usually turn it off right away. And we don't want people turning things off on things that you can control. So go buy a microphone. My favorite one to recommend to everybody actually is the Samsung Q2U. They got a bundle package on Amazon right now. It's $75. $75. You get a USB microphone and a mic stand and a windscreen. That's really all you need. It's plugged straight into your computer and you're ready to go.
I love that. And I love it because that is something that is at that next point of it's not overly expensive. It's an investment, but it's not an expensive investment because, I mean, I know like you're using the Shure, aren't you? I mean, that's a, what, $300 mic?
Yeah, I think I paid around $300 for it.
Yeah, and they're amazing mics. They really are. If you're going to do a lot of it, and you know you're going to do a lot of it, both as a guest and as a host, then yeah, invest in that kind of thing. But if you're starting out, less than $100, you've got a great quality mic that you can get going with. And you're right when you say like people will turn off the podcast if the audio is bad. I've actually had that. I might have had a couple of episodes of a podcast that I listen to regularly, and somebody came in and he did this interview style, but they were more in an echoey room. And he didn't have a good audio with it. And I couldn't listen to more than 2 minutes before I just skipped the entire thing. And it sucked because I knew it was going to be great content. Like the person he was interviewing, I really wanted to listen to him, but I'm driving down the road trying to hear, and I just can't understand what they're saying because you got a, noisy car and all that kind of stuff. I was like, yeah, no, I'm done. And I just pushed past it. And that is one of the things that I have seen so much, that people will have a great show and then you might have a great interview, but if you don't have audio quality to make it easy for people to understand you, it's just going to lose them.
And I think it actually works both directions. So we are I think most podcast listeners will turn off bad audio quality, but there's a little bit of give on this too. Like you don't have to buy a $300 microphone and invest in top of the line production team and all of the equipment to optimize your video or your audio from a 95% to a 99 or 100%. I do think there's a little bit of give in the world of podcasting, maybe more so than if you're listening to music and really professionally producing music. But once again, at the same time too, there is this kind of bottom threshold, and like anything under, let's call it 80%, like people aren't going to listen to because there's so much content out there they can listen to that does kind of hit the marks in terms of their audio quality.
Right. No, and I would back that 100% because it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be super fancy. It's just got to be good enough, but it's not that good enough. The bar is high enough. You know what you're listening to. If you record something and you play it back and you're like, hey, this sounds a little garbled, it probably is going to be garbled for everybody else. Don't use it. Yep. I mean, we're not talking like phenomenal change. You just got to get it to a certain point where it's just respectable. I think that's more you got to get to that respectful stage. That's where you should be.
Yeah.
And then you could always make it bigger, better, fancier, and cooler down the road.
And once again, most of this is preventable in pre-production with just a quality microphone, dynamic microphone. Like I said, the Samsung Q2U, go buy it on Amazon. It's $75. You're not really got to be able to get much better than that at that level of quality. Treated room. And by treated room, just think through the room that you're recording in. No big windows or a bunch of metal. Pick something with soft fabric, carpets, sofas, even throw some big pillows in the corner. Keep it kind of small and intimate. And if you have a guest that doesn't sound right, then take the time to pause and try to help them or support them on increasing their audio quality. Because the last thing you want to do is try to fix bad audio. You can only fix bad audio up to a certain spot. So yeah, I think
Right.
most of it you can prevent in pre-production. And the great thing is you can hire someone like my team, or you can use different software to enhance or optimize your audio quality after the fact too.
Yeah, no, and that is a very big point. The what you've got in the room does make a big difference. I know from my background in audio as well. I had the same thing. And my first podcast, I actually had a box that was lined with foam around my microphone to bounce, basically to stop all the outside noise.
Mm-hmm.
And it was ghetto as all hell, but it worked. you know. And nowadays, we've upgraded everything and the technology's gotten better. So you have all that there, but there's some simple things you can do. And especially if you're only using using audio and you're not adding video to it. If your mic is giving you too much noise or your room is very noisy and echoey, get a cardboard box and literally line it with some foam and just put it around three out of four sides of the microphone. And that will make a difference. It's like, start with the basics and then upgrade over time.
Yeah. Well, if you're audio only too, you can just go pull that into your closet where you got a bunch of hanging clothes and usually a very small environment. Yeah. I see many of podcasters recording out of their closet because it's usually the best quality studio that they have in their entire room or house.
Yep, I've been on several shows that way. Some of them even record video shows, so you can see their entire clothing line, and it's like, all right, well, at least I know what you're wearing next week.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that could probably be kind of fun too. You could probably put some shelving up in your closet and make fun of it a little bit. Hey, it's Justin. I'm calling in from my studio, aka my closet, and just play to light on it. I think most people will forgive you for it. It's not a big deal.
Right. As long as the content at the end of the day, I mean, the content is obviously the most important thing. Audio being they're not going to consume the content without the audio being good, but have fun with it. I think that's like the gold right there is you got to have fun with it more than anything else.
For sure.
I mean, if you're not doing that, you're not going to keep doing it. You're going to be one of those people that never got past like 7 episodes. And so when it comes to the content side, let's talk about what are some of the guidelines that make a good show? Like some people go overboard with all kinds of trailers and all kinds of crazy stuff. And some people it's just, let's get on. And I'm just going to talk for 2 or 3 minutes. What do you think? What do you think some of the guidelines people should be looking at?
I think most good content actually comes out of conversation with your ideal listener. And that might even bring up something else. If you can't identify your ideal listener, you probably can't make great content. Like if there's not a niche that you're speaking to nowadays, then you're really not speaking to anybody. And understanding that niche, if that's what you self-identify as, or if you want to support this group of listeners, I would spend as much time as possible getting to know them. So on my original show, The Struggle is Real, it's all about personal finance for 20-somethings. Of course, I lived through my 20s and understood a lot of my own personal issues with 20-somethings, but I also spend a lot of time talking to 20-somethings about what they're currently facing. And to be honest, retirement planning or how I'm about to retire at 60 is not something that came up too often. It was more so like, how do I pay back my student loans, or how do I ask for a raise, or many of those other things. So I took core concepts or questions that I got, and I built content around that. And I really knew who I was speaking to, and I used examples specific to that audience. From a length standpoint, it should be as long as it needs to be. If you can make great episodes in 2 minutes, great. If you need 2 hours, awesome. But I always tell people the episode should be as long as they need to be. No more less or more than that.
I love it. That is brilliant. And that is such a simple thing. It's like, it doesn't matter what the length is, as long as the content is good. Yeah. I mean, I've had times, and it's no different. Like I come from an email copywriting standpoint. It's like, how long should your sales page be? It should be as long as it needs to sell the product you're trying to sell. That's the answer.
It almost feels like a cop out sometimes too, whenever I say something like that, but it's like, does it need an example? Does it need further explanation? Then add it. Did you get your point across? Great. You can't do that unless there is some kind of planning. I really struggle with people that mostly wing their podcast episodes. I do encourage most of my own clients. And of course, I put it into my own practice too, of like doing some preparation for a conversation. If it's you as a solo host or you interviewing somebody, once again, who's my audience? What's the core question that I'm trying to answer with this episode? And how do I and or my guest answer that question? So kind of going through that line of thinking and starting to do some planning for an episode, I think really helps shape an episode. And then you can start to realize, okay, here's the point I'm going to make. Here's how I'm going to make it. Here's the example I need to support it. Here is the punchline. Here's the piece of advice that I hope that everybody gets from this episode. You line those out. You have a storyboard for your episode now. And now you just need to go ahead and execute on it.
Right. No, and I that is good. And I will admit I'm kind of guilty of I have basic guidelines I go by, but I don't really storyboard it out that much.
Sure. and I should back up too, and not something that comes up a little bit for me. We've been talking about ROI, and I almost double backed on this earlier with ROI too. And I know I came from the lens of a business owner having a podcast and saying, if you're comfortable not getting any ROI out of your podcast for 1 year, I really meant, are you comfortable not making a sale directly from your podcast?
Right.
But the very first thing I have all of my clients go through is rank ordering this list of 15 goals that I have. And these 15 goals are all goals that I think a podcast could help support you with. And only a handful of them are monetary. There are other things like, this can be a content engine for my social media channels, or this is an opportunity for me to meet people that I'd never have access to, or I want to grow my communication skills or improve my communication skills. So I force everybody to rank order these and tell me what's important and what's not important. And at the end of the day, that's the real ROI. That's what I like to track. Those are my key metrics. So if you told me, build my personal brand, meet cool people, and get leads for my business are your top 3 goals for your podcast, I build ROI metrics based off of those. And then we have that conversation. So yes, maybe you don't have too many leads coming in from your podcast early on, but I could say, how many people did you meet through your podcast that you hadn't known before? And that's another key ROI metric that you should be tracking. And that might dictate how much emphasis you need to put in certain areas. So for you, if meeting cool people is a key part of your podcast strategy or ROI or metrics, which I'm assuming it is, you maybe don't have to be thinking about the audience as much as somebody that wants to grow or gain leads or grow an audience necessarily does. You're going to think more about the human element, and you do a lot of good things that a lot of other podcasters don't. Like, you have a lot of pre-prep communication. You spent 10, 15 minutes with me in the green room building a relationship. We had an intro call before this, and you did a really good job getting to know and interact with me. So I do think you're hitting all the marks. You're planning for what you're trying to get out of your podcast, even if it isn't like, oh, I'm thinking about my core listener and I'm storyboarding a whole episode for that core listener.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it is, for me, that is it. This particular show is all about the conversations, just having, meeting cool people. And like I said, it's generally people that I've met, and then I share them out with the world because I think that the world needs to meet them. That's the whole premise of the show. And have I got clients out of it? Absolutely. My first show was Driving Your Marketing, and it was all about, I would interview other marketers in all kinds of different industries and share their stories and their tips and tricks and resources. If you want to get into like podcasting, you and I would have had an interview about podcasting specifically and how to be strategic about it. I've had people that were video marketers. I had people that were advertisers and all that kind of stuff. And the fun thing about it was that was purely I launched it because I wanted to interview these people so I could learn the stuff that they had to teach. And so I get to share it with everybody else at the same time. But the number one thing was, after we stopped recording, I would be like, thank you so much. This was awesome. I appreciate it. What can I help you with? And they would come back to me, and there was a specific CRM system that we used all the time back then. And they're like, you know what? Hey, I need somebody who can help me with this thing. And I was like, well, I happen to live in the house with the person who's probably in the top 5% of the world. So yeah, we could probably help you with that. And they're like, really? And it wasn't even, I mean, that's how a whole division of our company was born. And we did a ton of sales behind the scenes for something that nobody even knew we publicly did. And it was all through the podcast. So that wasn't intentional, but it worked out really well. And that's one of the things I think is really, that's one of the things I love about podcasting, and where it's the possibilities are. You come in, and some people come in with that whole, we're going to build it and we're going to get all these sponsors. We're going to do all this stuff. And I'm like, no. Look at everything else. Look at what's the other opportunities are. You could grow to that easily. It's a possibility, but think of the other opportunities that are sitting right there in front of you. And for me, of course, it always starts with the, meet cool people, have a good conversation first.
Totally understand that.
Yeah. So as we're going through everything here, I got a couple more questions for you. One, if somebody is actually, before I ask that question, I have one more thing I want to ask you, because you touched on a little bit. We talked about solo versus like having a guest. Do you think that there should be, like, should a show have one or the other, or is a combination of both valid? What are your thoughts on that specific topic? Because I know people have asked that question before. And like, for me personally, I love having a guest. I don't want to talk. I don't want to just talk to a microphone. I want to have a conversation. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm going to frustrate people, and I'm going to say it depends. And I think it really depends on how someone would complete that and rank order that list of 15 goals that I mentioned. Of course, if networking or building relationships or collaboration is a key part of this, even learning from other people, yes, guest interviews make sense. If sales or personal branding kind of leans more towards the top, then I might guide someone to do more solo episodes. But from a general rule of thumb, if you're getting going on podcasting or just starting podcasting, I think you should use the first 25, maybe even 50 episodes to experiment with both and decide what feels right for you. What do you enjoy? Because at the end of the day, podcasting can be laborious. And I do think you have to love podcasting to keep going. And the real gold in podcasting comes with consistency and sustainability over time. So if having a guest on your show to help develop an episode feels sustainable for you, great. If booking that guest or reschedules or preparing for that guest, or editing another person based on their microphone quality is laborious and time intensive, then maybe lean a little bit more towards solo. My clients kind of lean both directions for multiple different reasons. I think if you are new to the game, though, I would just encourage you to try both, see what feels right for you, but also be thinking through what's the goals of my show, and with those goals, would it make sense to do more solos, or would it make more sense to do more guest interviews?
I love it. Thank you. Because that's one of the things I know people do think about. That is like, which way should I go with it? And for me, naturally, I want to have a conversation. But some people, they're more into, they want to tell their story or their knowledge base. And so it's like, I get people, and they'll ask me that. It's like, well, what should I do with it? And it's like, it kind of depends on you. And so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. This has been a lot of fun here. So any last thoughts as far as anything related to the podcasting world for somebody who's thinking about starting a podcast that we want to cover before we wrap up?
I think just doubling down on what I just said, get going. It's the most important part. I think every podcaster that has found success podcasting, I ask them, what's your biggest regret? And they all tell me, I just wish I would have got started earlier. And I think that goes to show that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have this grand plan. Get going and you'll sort it out over time.
Yep. I love it. Very, very cool. Okay. So last two questions. Last question will be the easy one. How are people going to get a hold of you? So we'll get that in a second. But before we do that, this is the Meet Cool People show. So I do like to ask people, what does meeting cool people mean to you?
After doing like 150 plus interviews, I've realized that everybody is cool in their own unique and interesting way. And for me, meeting cool people just means being curious and exploring that with each person that you have a conversation with. Even someone like you prepping for this conversation, I learned that you're really big into archery. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we could have hours of conversation about archery. And it's just finding that angle, how someone is interesting, how somebody is cool, not necessarily labeling somebody as cool or not cool, but figuring out specifically what makes this person cool.
I love it. And yes, archery is my hobby.
I was listening to an episode and you were talking about like the archery golf too. That sounds really fun. Like they put holes like 700 yards away and you shoot arrows to that hole. I was like, that sounds fun.
That is so much fun, and I so miss it. The biggest thing with that is hoping you find your arrows, because that's not always an easy thing when you're shooting that long. So far, like the bow, my longbow that I have, my maximum is I can shoot 190 yards at a time. So that's a couple of shots out. So it is pretty much like golf, but it's a lot of fun. It really is. That is cool.
That's cool.
Well, and you just brought up something real quick that I want to bring up. It's cool that, to me, that means a lot that you did that research to learn more about me as well. And I think that, for those people that are looking at guesting, that's something that's kind of cool. If you go above and beyond like that, that does make a difference, and it makes the host remember you even further. So it's kind of cool. I love it.
Podcasting is really important to me, and I don't take for granted the invitation to come on your show and be a part of the Meet Cool People community here. And I want to make sure I'm putting in just as much effort as the host is putting in. And I appreciate when people reciprocate that and come on my show and do the same.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, find out more about what you guys are, possibly hire you to help them with their podcast, what's the easiest way for them to get a hold of you?
If you're into podcasting or trying to launch a podcast, feel free to head over to simplepodstudios.com. You can fill out our form there, or you can find my email address and email me directly. Always happy to answer any questions related to podcasting. And I have tons of podcast communities that I also run. So if you want to be a part of those, feel free to shoot me a message. And then if you're into personal finance, come find me on whatever podcast player you're listening to right now. That's The Struggle Is Real. You'll see me with a coffee cup as the cover art.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justin. It is my pleasure to have you come hang out with me today. This has been a lot of fun. I knew it was going to be good, and the time flew by way faster than I thought it would. So obviously it was a good conversation. So thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And everybody get out there. Have an amazing week. As always, if there's anything I can do to help you out, reach out and let me know. Take care. And that wraps up another Meet Cool People show. Now, if you like what you heard, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, or review so I can help introduce these amazing cool people to even more amazing cool people. And just remember, meeting cool people is just the beginning. You need to have a system in place to follow up with the amazing people that you meet. This is exactly what we do for our clients. If you'd like to see if my team and I can help you, go to followuprockstar.com and check out the case study video to see exactly how we're helping our clients turn casual connections into cash clients for life. Again, go to followuprockstar.com and we'll see how we can work together to turn you into a follow-up rockstar.